Okay, now the recording's starting. So for mini project 3, again, make sure that you've finished the tutorial for the Flash setup that we went through. Watch all 3 videos. That way you can get all that set up. The goal this week with this mini project is it's a little bigger and that you're going to develop some kind of small web app of your choice. And the goal is that you come up with some small web application that will meet these requirements down below. This could be a precursor for your final project if you choose to have it be one, right? So if you take a little bit of time and a little effort here to kind of think, or maybe you've had an idea for your final project, this is a place for you to test it out with this framework. All right. As far as points, the standard 5 points for initial comments, 5 points for your imports. Note that there's not going to be a preset up here. In other words, you can add and remove all the stuff that you want. It just has to meet these requirements. So you'll need to have Flask set up and you'll have to use that framework. You will need this proper folder structure. Use that tutorial as an example. So make sure you have the proper folder structure. Now, don't call it Flaskr because your project is not Flaskr, right? Flaskr was the name of the blog project. So if you are going to reuse your materials, make sure you're obviously not reusing the names of that web app. You have your own web app. Same way with the proper routes and everything else that you were setting up, making sure that you're not reusing the hello one, right? Everything else used blueprints. You should be using blueprints in here as well. So that whole structure is worth 10 points of your grade. You need to have a minimum of 5 total pages, and you must use the proper template structure, meaning you should have a base template, and then you should have templates that go on from there.
So like 5 different web pages, basically.
Essentially 5 different web pages. Yep. A minimum of 5. You may need more than that in order to pull off whatever your web application is, but there should be a minimum of 5 pages. Anybody have any questions on that? No, you're good.
One page that usually is a form, so like a login page or just a capture page, like, hey, fill out this thing.
Technically, those are other requirements that are further in there. So preferably like your registration and your login page wouldn't be counting as a page because that's another requirement in this system. So I'm looking for full web pages that will actually interact with the database, whether you're adding material through a form or a post, or maybe it's just pulling data from the database and presenting it on the screen. Remember that when you set up this structure, and this will be more important when you get down to the README on this one, but if you want to have preloaded data in the database, make sure you create a file that does that. And remember the tutorial showed you how you could do that. All right. So if you want me to, when I initialize the database, that it actually have some base information in there, you can do that. Absolutely. You just need to follow that structure of having, you have your original schema file, which creates the database. And then there should be a way for you to load that information in using a SQL export, and it will load it in and do a insert into table, etc. It's in that particular tutorial. And I can go back in the tutorial and show you where that's at. All right. You need to have at least one page that utilizes a form and has a proper get and post. There again, this does not necessarily count for your login or your registration system, as that's a requirement that's further down here. So I'm looking for some other page, at least one, that has a proper get and post route set up for that page. Remember, you check for what first in your views? Does anybody remember?
Those errors?
You mean there's one of these two that you check for first when you set up your routes and your views.
You check the get first, don't you?
Nope, the other one. Yep.
Okay.
So like, for example, if we go back and look at our code here and we look at, say, our blog blueprint, anytime you have a get and post on a certain page like this one here, for the example, when we updated our blog, we always check for the post first. And that's to see if you're submitting form data to us. If you're not, well, then we simply do a render of the actual HTML because that will be the get side, right? You're calling for the page itself. Remember, get is intended for you to pull the initial page. Post, you're sending information to the server. All right. You'll need to set up a SQLite database with a minimum of 2 tables, and they must be linked together with a foreign key. All right, we did that in the tutorial with the users. You could use that users, or you could expand a little bit further with some other foreign key.
That's when you had the user make a password, right?
In this case, for that foreign key that goes across there, it's actually set up so that in the blog table, there's the schema. In the blog or the post table, we have it set up so that the author ID is an integer. And then we have a foreign I key that maps that author ID. It sets this based off the user that is currently logged in. It's a way for us to map from this table back to this table so that we can pull information without it marrying onto something like the user name, right? It's all tied to IDs at this point. All right, so you'll need some form of that. You also need to use Bootstrap in your web templates. And I don't dictate exactly all the pieces of Bootstrap that you use, but I do want to see at least one modal there in use.
Can you show example of that?
Yep, the modal, if you remember, was when we tweaked our final project.
That's the pop-up menu, right?
Yep. So in our project, it
I
was.
missed that day, sorry.
No, you're good.
Yeah.
Let's see here, user password. And when we hit edit and we hit delete, that was this little pop-up
Okay,
here.
okay. I want to make sure that has like a modal dialog, right, or pop-up, so.
Yep. Now you could do it in a delete in your project. You could do it for the registration, however you want to use it. It just needs to be used appropriately in
Like
your
a confirmation, basically.
What's that?
Like you're using it as a confirmation.
You could use it as a confirmation. You could use it as a register option. So if you were here on your main page and you click register, instead of going to a registration page, you could use it as a pop out there to do it. Or maybe as a email or about us or something that makes sense to use a modal for. It shouldn't just be slapped in to get the points. Like, should be a proper use of a modal.
So I can't have a button that says modal button.
Probably not the best idea. All right. You'll need to set up some sort of registration and login system. Again, you can use the tutorial as an example or a base on how to do that. All right. If you want to create a full user profile, you can definitely add that ability to do that. You just do it over the top of that existing system that you had. All right. By doing something like a user profile, that would actually get you in either 1 to 2 pages worth of information. It would also help you get this here where you had to have a page that has a proper get and post. Right? You could add another table that is purely for user profile. And again, it would have a foreign key that goes back over to the user table. The user table just stores the username and password. So I would recommend having a user profile that ties back to this ID here, similar to what you did on this post type side, so that that profile information is separate than the username and password. This would be something like their email address, full name, all the user profile stuff you would see on any other web application out there. Let's see, then there'll be 5 again to make sure you have 5 commits. I had several people that did very large commits to get the 4th or 5th commit. That doesn't really fly here. And you saw me start to take points off for that. Like, you should be committing often and on your way through there, right? Most average, I would say, on the last 2 projects, most people were hitting the 10 to 15 range. Some were hitting 20 range, maybe even a little higher if they were really working on little pieces. Again, it's not a number game. It's to make sure that you're doing appropriate commits along the way. Where I really saw an issue with this is they actually had some really good commits. It was the initial setup and things were up and working. And then they had one massive commit that committed every single file and completely overwrote their original files. It was quite obvious it was AI driven. All right. Again, while I allow AI in the class, don't use it to write your entire project, because when it comes time to the final one, you have to explain that. And I had about I would say 3 or 4 people that did something like that in the first 2 projects. Like, you got plenty of time to be working on this. I encourage you to make sure you get your commits out and work on your project. As I told you in the very beginning of this class, the only thing students struggle with the most in here is time management. There's plenty of time to get the work done, which is probably a problem because most people don't get the work done then. All As usual, I'll be checking out the main branch. Make sure you actually have the requirements file. Once again, as a reminder, in your README files, make sure that you explain to me how to do a pip install on the requirements file. Do not tell me to install packages because that will eventually change the version numbers of the packages I'm installing. All right. So use your requirements file. Some people try to hand make a requirements file. It will not work. You have to tell me which exact version of each of those components that we're utilizing. I had another student that did not use a virtual environment, and so they had 126 packages for a very simple app that they bid for project 2. All right. The reason that showed up as 126 packages, every system package installed on that computer was in there. All right. You must be using a virtual environment, and you must be only including the packages that you actually use in the project. That's been outlined since the very beginning. Okay. Use pip freeze. I strongly encourage you to double check your pip freeze right before you submit your final portion of it. That makes sense? The last two things, you should have 2 commits at the very end. One is your requirements file update. The other one should be your README update. And you may have several of those along the way, but those should probably be the last 2 commits in your project. All right, last 10 points, and this is going to be more and more important in going forward here, is that README explains what the project is. Use the template, right? You got a template, copy, paste, fill in the template. This time, I have to highlight again, be very thorough on your explanations. And the reason for that is you will need to explain the steps of initializing your initial database, how to actually run your development server of your project itself. In other words, there'll be several commands that I will have to run in order to run your project. You need to outline those in the README. You also need to outline those using the proper flavor of Markdown, meaning they should be in the command format. So if we come back here and look at the README, remember that this right here is the command format. 3 backticks, the command, 3 backticks.
It puts it in that nice format for it, right?
It puts it in the nice format for copy and paste. So that's the Markdown flavor of how you would do commands. If you don't know what a backtick is, it's that key right next to your number 1 on the keyboard, right under the tilde. Okay. Looks like an apostrophe. It is not. It's a backtick. Okay. Overall, does anybody have any questions on Miniproject 3? Again, the project can be whatever you want it to be. If you want to use this as a way to test out your final project, see if this framework works, you may need to put in some additional effort, obviously, towards the end. Note that I don't have anything here that requires an API. You don't require any other base information, some CSV data stuff, nothing like that at all. This is meant to be some web app of your choice. We talked about putting in pre-information into the database. Let me go back and grab that so it's in the video. So this is where you create your schema, and this is the design of the database itself. And then at another point, we did an insert of that. Find the actual page here. Second, I gotta figure out. I know it was in here. It was right here during the test data. So you would create something similar. Obviously, it wouldn't be in the test folder, but you could create this data.sql, and it's going to have commands that look like this. So once you created your initial schema file, you're going to run these commands, insert into user, blah, 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 these individual files. If you're struggling on how to build this SQL, these are just SQL statements, right? No different than what you see in the database or the schema one. These are just SQL statements. So you have a SQL dialect up here at the top. You can tell it to use SQLite. It will make sure it writes it for you. If you need assistance writing your own data SQL, then you can use something like AI to help you get the proper SQL structure, right? I'm not here to teach SQL. I'm here to teach the framework and using the Python portion of it. So I'm okay if you use AI to help you build a database file. Like you could tell it, hey, I have this data. I need this to be, give it your schema, give it what you want to be put in those fields, and it will help you generate a schema or a data SQL file for that. Then what you do is you come in here to your DB file. Notice how we created this DB command that we had before, and we had this init DB portion down here, right? The command up here was to get the DB. Then it wants you to read that file, this schema file, and actually read and encode that. You're going to do very, very similar with your data.sql stuff. You would run your init DB command first. Then you could create a command that says load DB, in which case it would load the database with whatever pre-information you wanted it to do. And then from there, I would go ahead and start your project. All right. Anybody have any questions on preloading the database with information?
I'm just gonna watch those videos again and kind of do it that.
Yep, if you watch the videos and use this test section as kind of a guide, you'll be just fine. And again, use AI to help you structure this if you need it to. Tell it you're using it for SQLite and that you would like to preload the database with some information. It's literally what this is trying to get you to do as a test. You guys are going to do the same thing, only not as a test.
So we could use AI to help build out.
This portion of it, absolutely. Yep. You just tell it, hey, I'm doing SQLite. Here's what my table structure looks like. I want to put this information in that table. And it would go ahead and fill this out in the appropriate format.
Jason, do you want us to run our topic by you before we get started to make sure we're on the right track, so it's not too close to the tutorial, or are you not concerned about that?
I'm not concerned about that in the mini project. In other words, this should be some web app of your own design. In other words, if you choose to do a blog, it should be different than the blog that we did in the tutorial. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah. Because one of the things I was thinking about doing was like making a kind of a study guide where I'd fill it out like we did in the blog, but I was afraid that'd be too close to the tutorial.
No, you could still use that. Just make sure you add features that is pertinent to what your web app is. You can absolutely use the tutorial as like a template structure, something to get you going. I have no problem with that. It's just don't rebuild that or rebrand it as your own. Like I want you to build on top of that and do some more with it.
Okay.
So for example, if you took, you tweak the structure of what we did in the tutorial, but then you come down here to the very end and you did like all of this or even a very large chunk of this, now it becomes your own app. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking about doing the same thing, like a security blog, right?
Yeah. So in that case, just make sure that you create additional material like that, what this is doing, and to implement some of this is a pretty good project 3.
Okay. Yeah. Cause I was thinking like the tags are like on like a post for another class.
Yeah. There again, as long as you make it your own project, you style it, you format, have the correct number of pages. Again, the login and register does not count as your page count. And your, there was another page in there. No, that other page just required at least one that had a post and get, and your login and registration doesn't count as a post and get. So like in the form of this project, it was the create or update page that actually had the get and post set up correct. The whole goal here is I want you not only writing web pages, I want you writing to the database and retrieving information from the database. That part is, quote, hard, right? It's not hard. I mean, there's templates out here for you to do it. But as you get to writing it and you're not familiar with how to write commands like this to go get your information, that's the part that will take a little bit of skill in order to get that up and going. Especially if you're not SQL experts, and I don't expect that you are. There again, use these as a framework, try them, test them. You have AI to help kind of guide what that SQL command should look like if you ask it. You know what I mean? I have this as my table schema. That's how I would start that conversation immediately. Here's my table schema. I want to retrieve this information and this information only if you don't want to retrieve everything. And this is the ID that I want to match on, and this is how I want to update it, for example, like here.
For example, like if you're looking at this as project 3, this only has one page, the blog page, right?
It has the blog page, but you technically have 3 other pages. You have your create page, you have your update page, you have all those different routes in there. So like here, you have your index page, a create page,
I see what you're saying.
update page.
So within the blog page, like, oh, when you click blog, you're saying, so like, hey, make new blog, that's a page. Edit old blog, that's a page. You want to delete this blog, that's a page.
Because you have to write entirely different functions out here for that to work.
Okay.
Yep.
Just making sure.
There again, don't try to do the bare minimum on this because you will hurt yourself for the final. Like push yourself a little, get it working. Clearly hear me say, get something up and get it working. There again, that's where everybody struggles on 3 and 4 here, is they try to do something beyond fancy and they forgot to just get what was at least listed there for the homework assignment. For example, they'll spend forever to make something super cool and completely ignore that they forgot to do the README and the PIP requirements and all this other little stuff below, and they lost 30 points right off the bat. And they put hours into the project. I'm not trying to be a bad guy. You have to meet these requirements. Anything above and beyond these requirements is great because now you know how to interact with this system. And it may lead you to want to use that in the final project. The final project, that's a little different. You do have until Sunday the 26th to turn this in. And again, that will be a hard deadline on that 26th so that I can start to get things graded and back to you. It will take me a much longer time to grade these than it will the first 2 homework assignments. And as you noticed on them, I take my time grading them, checking out the code, running the code, giving you feedback. It usually takes no less than 10 to 15 minutes per student. At 25 students, do the math. Hours of grading. Yeah. All right. Anybody else have any other questions? So that Monday, the 27th is when I will start checking out projects and grading them. So you can go ahead and submit now. Make sure you do that just to get me a URL in. That's fine. I've had students that got close to forgetting that portion of it, but then you should be doing commits all along the way until Sunday, the 26th.
Is all your stuff on GitHub?
Yes. Yep. You should be able to pull up that.
Well, no, the reason why I asked was like, because I had to miss class. I want to do it. I want to basically do what we did in class.
Mhm.
But I want to compare like, hey, and then I can go through and do mine.
Yep. It should all be there. Now notice the code that's out there is the final code.
That's but what I'm saying is like, I'm going to watch the video
Yep.
of you doing this. And if my code doesn't land like that, I know I can start going, oh, I should go read more.
Right. But what I'm saying is it may not line up even when I'm doing in the video because the final code up there is the final code. So you may have to go back to an older commit to match what we did that day. Especially after we added all the bootstrap and everything else.
That's what I've been doing. Like whenever I miss a class, I go back and say, okay, maybe like follow along with what you did. And then if it doesn't match, I'm like, okay, I need to go back on.
Yeah, because you can come in here. That's the whole purpose of it, right? Is you can come into Flash tutorial. You look at my commits. This is what I do, by the way, when I grade you guys. I come in here and look at the commits.
I learned that I learned like, because why is mine not like yours? And then that's how I realized, because that was my main thing was I was trying to follow along with you.
Yep.
And I knew your stuff was done, but like, okay, as long as at the end of it, it should look like yours, but I wanted to like train of thought how we got there.
The good news is you can come back to this one, say you want this commit here, right? This commit ends in AA, or actually the commit ends in 9F9. If you want to do commit 9F9, you can roll back in the code and just go to 9F9. So if you go back to the code, actually, sorry, I just was there. If you go to the commits and we go back to say this one and you click browse files, you are viewing this as it was 899. This is what it was at that point in time.
Okay.
So that you can pull that code. You can also do that in the drop down up here.
Yeah.
You can view all the branches and the different commits at that point.
Because it was just handy when I would try and they're like, why is your stuff working? Why was it? Because on the video, your stuff was working and I could not get it. And I was able to pull up like, oh, I forgot to add.
Exactly. And sometimes it's like a comma or.
I was able to do that different view.
Oh, the diff page? Yep.
That wasn't just copying. I'm like, what is the difference? And I go, oh, he did add a comma, or I didn't have a tilde, or I didn't have. There was one where I didn't have a squiggly bracket at the right spot.
And this is what that backtick creates, right? So that I can easily copy this and paste it right into a command line and run it. Again, you should give me more than just these. you should tell me how to run this program. Some of you just had, hey, run the program. Well, I don't know how do I run it, right? I pretend to be dumb when we're working on this. Don't infer anything because you are publishing this out to public. And the goal is that you would be able to use this perpetually moving forward so that other people could see your code. The more you document it, the more you write it, the better job opportunity you have, frankly. When we were hiring people, that's what we looked for. All right, good questions. Anybody
Hey,
online?
Jason,
Yeah.
are we going to have classes next week?
Yes, we will. We'll jump right into Django next week.
Okay.
Yep. So starting on Monday, we will jump into the Django tutorial. And then, so you'll be working on your own Flask project in the background. I encourage you to not wait till the end on the Flask one, because then you can become a little confused between Flask and Django as you're working through them.
Or you run out of AI prompts for the weekend.
That too. But Django is significantly more content to get through, so we absolutely have to start Monday in order to finish on time. So that will cover weeks 9 and 10, or I'm sorry, 10 and 11. And then from 11 on is your final project stuff.
Because we have winter or sorry, Thanksgiving breaks the whole week, right?
Yes. So you actually get, I think it's 6 weeks total to work on
Yeah,
your
I
final
remember.
project.
I was gonna have you pull it up because I was like, wait a minute.
Yep. So again, we'll go through Django. Starting on week 12, we start working on your final project. And you also have fall break inside this as well. So you technically end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks to work on your project. Whether you choose to work on winter break or not is your choice, but I don't assume that you're going to, which is why you have 5 weeks of allocated time to work on it. Now, during these weeks, we will just meet on Monday, and we'll cover this more when we get to that point, but we'll just meet on Mondays to go over these topics. Tuesdays rather, and then you guys will be working on your project the rest of the time. It's really just a check-in on those Tuesdays to make sure that you understand what you should be doing this week. All right. Anybody else got any other questions on Miniproject 3? Don't forget, you also had a quiz this week. Note that when we get to the Django one, you will also have a Miniproject 4, a midterm, and a quiz during that time.
All on Blackboard.
2 weeks from now, all on Blackboard.
Okay.
Yep.
Does that quiz is it just covering Flask, or is that going to do Streamlit and all that other stuff too?
Quiz 3 should just cover Flask. Same with quiz 4, it would just cover Django.
Okay.
Now the midterm exam covers everything.
So
Is that midterm set up the same way as the quizzes are?
Very similar, yes.
Okay.
Yep. It should be, and for all intents and purposes, open book, open note, as a midterm exam. No final exam in this class because you have the final project. And again, that is worth a massive chunk of your grade. If we come down here and look, for most of you, that should be anywhere from 30% of your final project or final grade. Your midterm exam is worth 20. Your mini projects collected together is 30, and your quizzes is 20. The only difference is for you grad students, I believe the breakdown is actually the same. The difference is in the final project, you have extra requirements. Right? And we'll cover that when we get to the final project stuff.
So for project 4, we're doing pages for this one, kind of like we're doing like the post. What's like the flavor of the next one? Is it more setting up stuff like this, or
in 4 you'll be working on Django?
Well, so in this for this we're making like a SQL database. We're doing stuff like that. What's like the kind of the basis of the Django one?
Django, it has its own format. You can actually change out the database under the hood.
Okay.
So because it writes it in an obfuscated way, you just plug in a driver of whether you want SQLite, you can use Postgre, you can use, there's a bunch that are supported by Django. That part doesn't matter because they have language that changes that in between.
Okay.
So here we're directly interacting with the SQLite database. You have to kind of write your own driver for it other than having the SQLite package. When we do Django, we'll actually use Postgre for the purposes of what we're doing. Actually, I don't even know if that's true. I think we still stick with SQLite with that one, but you don't know it. When you write your code, you don't write it in the same way as you write this here.
You're writing it very explicitly.
You don't write full SQL statements like this. You have a Django way of running those commands. And the reason for that is it obfuscates all of that. And we'll talk about why that's a better method. Like here, if I wanted to forklift out SQL and put in Postgre, some of that should work because it's still SQL syntax, but you would have a lot of things to change. In Django, you just change out your database because it will change its commands based off which database you're ultimately using. The templating system's different. There's a built-in admin interface, so all your user stuff is already handled by the back end. There's lots of niceties baked into that side of it. But it's a very similar type project. I think it's a polling project actually for the tutorial. So
I'm just trying to think of my final project.
There again, it's hard for you to pick Flask and Django or Streamlit now for your final project. You don't know the other frameworks yet. So this is, again, is a chance for you to try this one, see how you liked Flask. If you fell in love with it, great. Maybe you should look at doing that, or at least consider that when you go through Django. You may get to Django and go, yeah, I don't want to do that stuff by hand because mine's going to require all of this. I'd rather use the pre-built-in packages for it. Go with Django. Or I'm really looking harder at a full-blown data science type project. Streamlit seems to fit better overall for that. Here we go.
I'm thinking Streamlit so far for mine.
They all have a good reason to use them.
Because I wanted to use it for the other class, for my CyberOps class.
Possibly.
I was going to try to make it.
I've written more dashboards in Django than I have in Streamlit.
Really? Keep that in mind, because that was my main thing. Is like I was about writing a dashboard for the class.
Yep. It may be easier in Streamlit, but there's limitations of it. Especially if it's like a reoccurring thing. So a good example of Django apps I built. As a matter of fact, I'm contracted right now to write an inventory app for a restaurant. I've written ones as just basic websites. And then I've also done registration websites where it's almost like a campground, built out websites based in Django on that one. Django is kind of my go-to. Once you get familiar with it, there's so many niceties baked there that that's one less thing you have to work about. I'm currently developing a project on my own, which is the Forge CTF, which will end up generating all these CTFs on the fly with randomized codes for you guys to go through. So no two challenges are ever the same, and they're never on the internet because it generates them on the fly. There was a project that was out there that did that. However, it's extremely broken. And so I'm rewriting that based off a Django application to give it a web UI.
Okay.
So it is kind of
Question, Jason, for you. Where do you get time to do all this stuff?
That's a great question, man.
I was like, how often do you sleep?
Sometimes.
Do you just have your own flux capacitor?
I wish.
Time.
Or
A
like,
lot
I mean,
of it.
I'm sitting here
I'm
like
just hearing
it's
hearing it
that
from you
question.
makes
I'm like,
me like,
when do you go to bed?
Late.
when do you wake up? Early.
Now, between teaching these classes and then directing the institute and then running my own company on the side, it takes a lot of time and effort.
Why didn't they hire someone for the institute?
Oh, I am the guy that hired for that portion of it.
Oh.
So,
That explains monitor on your hand 24/7.
I feel like they should hire someone else so you could do less.
maybe I get paid for that. So
All right, fair enough.
no, I mean, as we're still on a recording. Anybody got any questions on Project 3?
YouTube, he doesn't
Nope.
sleep.
All right, I'll stop that recording.